It's 2012. I'm in Hollywood, having just done one of my first mainstream stunt jobs. The stunt coordinator, a man whose advice I trust, tells me, "Eric, you can move to LA tomorrow and make 6 figures by the end of the year." I asked him, could I keep producing indie Hong Kong style action films on the side? And he shrugged his shoulders, pursed his lips, and balanced his hands in front of him like a set of scales. It would have to be one or the other. Produce independent Hong Kong style action movies, or make 6 figures. It would be one of the most important career decisions I'd ever make. I've chosen the name the Hong Kong and Chinese style for this video essay because of the cultural associations with those terms, not the political ones. This is to better differentiate between the Southern Chinese movement styles, synonymous with Hong Kong, and the Northern Chinese styles. Hong Kong here is also synonymous to an extent with Taiwan, which had a very similar action style, which I'll be differentiating as well. I might be stating the obvious when I say this, but I love Hong Kong cinema. It's got some of the best action in the world, and it's the reason I got into stunts and filmmaking back in 2001 when I made a small stunt team called the Stunt People. And it's a style I've worked at for over 20 years. But what exactly is this so-called Hong Kong action style? Is it the animal shapes of Lau Galerong? Or is it the bullet ballet of John Woo? And if it's supposedly different from the American style, what's the American style? Is it a John Wayne fight? Or a Zorro fight? And what's the Japanese action style? Is it Chambara? Sentai? Kaiju? Then there's the Korean style of action. But this also used to be the Korean action style. And so is this. Hong Kong style, American style, Japanese style, Korean style, Bollywood style, Ugandan style, Thai style, Indonesian style, Russian style, Brazilian style. We tend to throw this style term around quite a bit, and it's not just for action and combat, but also for dancing styles, theater styles, and wrestling styles. So to be clear, I'm not talking about cinematic style here, but movement style, specifically a regional movement style. So what is it that makes these regional movement styles styles? Some will say it's the culture, but what part of culture? Is it the customs, the geography, the history, the dancing? Or is there something even further upstream that's responsible for a specific movement style? In tracing the origins of the Hong Kong style, American style, Japanese style, and many others, is it possible that we can find some kind of universal language of movement? In this multi-episode action essay, I'll break down the major movement styles of the world and explore what exactly comprises those styles to derive their movement languages. By comparing these movement languages, we can then construct the movement grammar that they all share. And we can then use this universal movement grammar to analyze real-world violence in a totally new way. I'll start off each movement language with my own experience in these languages as a stuntman and action designer, but I'm not taking this journey alone. I've consulted action experts from all over the world who will help us find the roots of movement language, stunt performers, stunt coordinators, martial artists, game combat designers, game animators, movie directors, and movie stars. Ambitious? Perhaps, but entertaining? Guaranteed. And hopefully, informative. So join me as we go to a small Northern Californian town near the Oregon border, the origin of this stuntman's quest to understand the language of movement. In 1996, the world was a very different place. Home internet ran at 56.6 kilobits per second. The main search engine was Alta Vista. You could get maybe 2 megabytes of free space at Fortune City. We had 30 channels on the slider cable box, so the content programming in my area was limited to stuff like Xena, Jackass, vaudeville, westerns, swashbucklers, musicals, and Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. And the video store supplied the rest of my American film diet. And by the time I hit puberty, I had done 2 laps through the entire martial arts and horror sections. Like so many of my generation, I was raised on Yankee entertainment, and I had no interest in taking part in any of it. Well, there was one aspect of Yankee entertainment that seemed kind of cool. As a semi-autistic kid in my small town of Redding, California, I was good at math, grammar, and science, but not much else. When my high school counselor asked what I wanted to do for a living, I asked him about being a stuntman. But he said a career in physics or computer science would be more suitable for my skills. So I got a job as a PHP and Visual Basic programmer and web developer at the local college when I was 15. And this is the only proof that I have, since we didn't really take many photos back then. And so that was the goal. Fast track through math and physics, get some experience in computer science, and maybe work at a particle accelerator someday. Fun. Until one night. Jackie Chan's police story had somehow found its way onto the USA Network, which was Channel 17, I think. I was mesmerized by what, on the one hand, looked like a well-choreographed dance, but expressed far more tension and danger than anything that had come out of Hollywood. This wasn't anything like the entertainment I'd been raised on. After some more research, I went to the video store and forked over $35 for a Tai-Sang VHS of Drunken Master 2. And it felt like a high, where an entire domain of movement had opened up that I had never known about. This was Hong Kong action. I was hooked. I wanted more. I consulted the Ron Lim website, Project J, and a few others to get more info. I took weekly 10-hour round trips to Chinatown and blew my paychecks on stacks of video CDs and DVDs. Some of these films were duds, but sometimes I unearthed a gem like Angry Ranger or Mirage. Nothing had been written online about any of these films, not in English anyway. I devoured these movies, and soon I was applying my web design and programming skills to build a website, putting out 3 to 4 reviews every week for years, which focused on the action primarily. I broke down the action scenes frame by frame, gave detailed analyses of the fight choreography, and dissected the filmmaking techniques. I then created a forum where Hong Kong cinema fans could all gather after Project J shut down, where we could all nerd out about the latest Hong Kong films that we found. Around that time, a handful of indie filmmakers like Kwun and Arapaaya had released some of their own low-budget martial art films online. Now, I wasn't much of a martial artist, but I figured, why don't I put my Hong Kong film knowledge to the test and make my own? And so, armed with a small camcorder, 2 friends, and 500 Hong Kong action film reviews floating around in my brain, we made our first independent Hong Kong-style action video. And that was the beginning of our team, the Stunt People. And we weren't alone. The whole forum started posting their own indie Hong Kong action shorts from all over the world. We shared filmmaking tips, sound effects that we ripped off from movies, low-resolution muzzle flashes, and slowly but surely we perfected our craft. We had it easier than the previous generation because we had the internet as a distribution platform. But that didn't stop the likes of Scott Adkins, who also made indie Hong Kong-style movies to build his career.
For Christmas, I got a camcorder. And that was it, man. I was just making films and editing them. And I'm the kid that's getting all the friends together to do this. And so you would teach yourself, you would watch a martial arts film and you would try and copy those angles and editing between 2 VCRs and all this stuff. And this was the beginnings of it all.
And filmmakers like Isaac Florentine learned how to shoot Hong Kong style out of necessity.
I basically did what is called edit to camera, because even when you shoot 8mm, you have only one reel. And you have to finish everything in one reel. So I didn't say roll camera action. I used to say action and then roll the camera.
But all that my generation, the millennial generation, needed was a cheap camcorder, a copy of Adobe Premiere, and a USB capture device to make our films. It was the beginning of a beautiful time. We were all inspired by the Hong Kong style. But again, what exactly was this Hong Kong style? That was always up for debate on the forum. The young masters took the Shaw Brothers style with long, unbroken takes and intricate choreography, and they made their own version of it. Vlad Rimburg and Manzanares combined Sammo Hung's techniques with a Korean flavor to make a unique action style. Ulrich in Germany took cues from wuxia and made his own action style. Jay Huerto mixed Sentai with Hong Kong action and made his. And the Stunt People, we did a sort of blend of Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung.
When you watch Hong Kong cinema, the way heroes and villains interact, they know how to dance with one another. We admired it so much, we wanted to replicate it. And we kept practicing until we got good.
Whatever the particulars, we all agreed that the Hong Kong style had 2 requirements. First, the filmmaking had to complement the action, and second, the movements had to be aesthetic. Now, in order to actually fulfill these requirements, as performers, we have to cooperate with both the production team and with each other to make the most aesthetically pleasing action that we can. This sometimes requires performing long sequences, again for aesthetic effect, with no discernible errors. This is not an easy movement style. Compare this with the action in something like Big Trouble in Little China, and we can see that the American style movements don't have the same speed and timing, and there's less emphasis on the shapes. They Live has a classic fight, but it also doesn't feature the shapes that characterize the Hong Kong style. And don't worry, I'm not dunking on American action, I'm going to give it its full due in a later episode. And so, when performing the Hong Kong style of movement as a performer, you have an incentive to do each movement as a sort of setup to the next movement in the string of movements. Attacks are naturally sharp, moving quickly into the next movement. If the attack is intended to be blocked, the attack is thrown as if it will be blocked, generating a nice shape. If the defender doesn't block, the attacker will swing as if he were planning on being blocked. So the intent isn't actually to strike the target, instead it's to strike the block. All of this, again, in the interest of making the most aesthetically pleasing movement possible. When first performing the Hong Kong style, it can be really difficult to get through a sequence of just 8 moves without making a mistake. In my first year, 8 moves was usually where we tapped out. But after some practice, you can do many more moves in a single take pretty easily. Now when you do this, you kind of go into autopilot, thinking 4 or 5 moves into the future, and sometimes this causes you to telegraph your next move, or your opponent's move. As happens here when I raise my hand up to block an attack that Andy hasn't even thrown yet. Or sometimes you might react to something that you expect to come but never actually does. Just like Jackie Chan here does. So even the best Hong Kong performers would make this mistake. By the way, look at how disappointed Dick Wei is in himself. Look at his face. You gotta wonder how much pressure there was on set in Hong Kong films. With more practice, you start to shape your movements, adding power and intent, and even putting in some filmmaking techniques that best complement the movement. And this is how you sharpen the Hong Kong style technique, improve your ability to perform long, complex sequences quickly and powerfully without telegraphing, hitting nice lines, and shooting them with the most compatible filmmaking methods. There is one more element of the Hong Kong movement style to cover, which is undercranking, which is where you film at 20 or 22 frames per second, which when played back at 24 frames per second gives a speed increase of 8 to 16%. That might not seem like a lot, but the effect is significant. Even Jackie Chan used undercranking to speed up his movements. His action in Gorgeous looks fast, but behind the scenes he's actually moving a little bit slower. And you have to speed up the behind the scenes video footage about 12.5% to match the film footage. 12.5% of 24 frames per second is a 3-frame difference, so Jackie might have shot this scene at 21 or 22 frames per second. So, love it or hate it, undercranking allows you to really accentuate the shapes, creating a highly aesthetic, collaborative, visual language. For us, we were technologically prohibited from speeding up our footage since prosumer cameras couldn't undercrank back then, and they dropped frames on a 24p timeline when the footage was sped up in post. But most of us chose not to speed up our action for a different reason. We wanted to make authentically fast movement. And yet we were so influenced by the Hong Kong rhythm that we tended to go at the same fever-pitch speed, all without speeding up the footage. Kinda crazy. But this aggressive drive for high-speed action naturally resulted in a higher level of momentum, which almost made it less Hong Kong and more, well, maybe that was the indie action movement language. Everyone would post their latest fight scenes on the forum, get brutal feedback, give brutal feedback in return, and then go and try it again. And then we would collaborate with other teams. LBP came and worked with us. We would go and collaborate with Vlad. Vlad would collaborate with members of Zero Gravity. And guys like Jay Huerto and Andy Long traveled all over the world collaborating with everybody. Whenever we met, we would always use this cooperative method of fighting, which felt like we were speaking a sort of shared universal language. Not a language like Cantonese or Mandarin or English, but a movement language. In the end, in this indie action movement, you weren't judged simply based on your skills. You were judged on how well you collaborated. So a flashy kicker who just wanted to showboat would find himself lower on the totem pole than a collaborative stunt performer with good reactions who could make the opponent look good as well. And while we might have adopted this collaborative spirit just watching Sammo and Jackie Chan working behind the scenes, I suspect that this universal language was a natural expression of the long sequences that required mutual coordination between performers and also between performer and production.
No, I would go and find these guys on the forums. I was like, hey man, like I love your stuff. Yeah, I want to collaborate. And then when I get there, I was like, oh my God, why do we have the same language? We're all big fans of the Hong Kong style, so we kind of default to that.
Now, I will admit that during this time I became kind of a snooty Hong Kong film nut. I only wanted my action clean and crisp, and all of my favorite childhood action films suddenly seemed a lot less impressive. They were fine and all, but they were too slow. They were too simple, or too sloppy. None of it could compare to Hong Kong martial arts cinema. I was a purist through and through, and I think a lot of us were, and we had good reason to be Hong Kong purists. The early and mid-90s had very Hong Kong style action in shows like the Power Rangers and films like Ninja Turtles and Desperado. In the late 90s, spillover of Hong Kong cinema into the mainstream, bringing Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, John Woo, Michelle Yeoh, it seemed to be clear evidence that the Hong Kong style, with its emphasis on shapes and crazy wire work, would dominate in the States.
So I got out of the Army and I moved to LA. I fell in with a really good crowd of people that also had this affinity for Hong Kong action. I mean, listen, we owe a lot more than people give credit to what they were doing in the 80s.
Chinese cinema is some of the most beautiful stuff that's ever recorded when you watch it. So Hollywood's like, hey, we want some of that. I remember participating in Batman and Robin. And in the third one, if you remember, he did an homage to the laundry scene where he's doing the laundry, doing Kung Fu. That was taken from a Chinese film. The point is, they were already taking from the East the way the East took from the West, and we were borrowing back from the art that they stayed true to. And that's the era that I came up in. Doing Batman, they kept saying, we want to be more like Hong Kong. And I go, what does that mean? I go, okay, you want Robin to be a martial artist? Okay, cool. We can kick some butt. And I participated in Blade right after Batman and Robin. I double frost in there. We were just borrowing, literally stealing. Like, we want to do that. And we did it, and we stole it. And the movie worked.
Martial law, again, another sort of trend-setting notch in the progress of how, Hong Kong comes into Hollywood. The team is broken up between three guys choreographing and coordinating at the same time. So we're literally getting the hands-on, real deal of Hong Kong madness, and it's just about creating the action. A lot of the American stunt guys were now able to do Hong Kong style stuff.
And that's where it really all took off for me, of really understanding the profound effect of Hollywood kind of coming back and paying for their sins of not listening to these guys. Because what they did is they just started making action stuff fun again.
Our faith in the Hong Kong style was shared all across the industry, and this facilitated a kind of myth in our world that as long as we kept working at our craft, we could make it in Hollywood someday as well. But then in 2002, The Bourne Identity comes out, with its emphasis on gritty choreography, shaky camera work, and rapid-fire editing. Through our Hong Kong film lenses, we all agreed that the Bourne style was the wrong style, and none of us thought that this kind of stuff would go anywhere. And then we started seeing the Bourne style in James Bond and Batman films and even B-action films. And soon it became clear that we had entered a new era of American action cinema. But if anything, this only catalyzed us. At the time, I was studying cinema at San Francisco State University, and my professors encouraged us to copy international cinema, which emboldened me to rebel against the Hollywood flavor and continue the independent spirit of filmmaking. Those college years allowed me to stay insulated from Hollywood and ultimately produce my Hong Kong-style feature called Contour. And Contour was a popular success and fueled many trips to Comic-Con and WonderCon, where we hawked DVDs and t-shirts. And even though in the end Contour barely broke even, I was still convinced that I could make a living doing the Hong Kong action style. Over the next 6 years, I kept making short films, keeping day jobs, building up my savings, making more short films, more day jobs to save money. Then I quit my job and dumped everything into my second feature film, Death Grip, in 2011. I sustained a really bad shoulder injury during production, and doing another indie Hong Kong style feature film and wearing 10 different hats as a producer, director, performer, choreographer, and editor. By the time I was done with Death Grip, I was 30 and exhausted and broke. Fortunately, I got called to do a quick stunt job in LA, which was cakewalk compared to what I had just gone through with Death Grip. And that's when I got the offer. Make 6 figures in Hollywood, or keep doing the Hong Kong thing. Of course, I could technically do both, but I could only make a living at one. And for whatever reason, I chose the Hong Kong thing. After this, Clayton Barber, my mentor, produced Rope It Up 1 and 2, directed Blindsided, brought me to China for a stunt job. All projects with a Hong Kong Chinese action style. By now, I had made Hong Kong action-style movies for so long that I felt like I was living it, like I embodied it for all this time. But the work wasn't exactly flowing in, and to complicate matters further, I was now married, and I was a father. I needed this stunt career to work. I needed a miracle. And that miracle started peeking its head over the horizon. Little did I know that I would soon have the opportunity of a lifetime, motion capturing the stunts in combat for Kratos in the 2018 God of War. But it would demand that I do the impossible, perform a totally new, non-Hong Kong style of action, and break a 15-year habit. And just how is one expected to break a habit like a movement style? By identifying it. What was this Hong Kong Chinese style, and where did it come from? What was it that inspired Hong Kong cinema itself? Obviously, it came from some melting pot of Chinese martial arts, opera, and warfare, but if you pressed me on those things, I wouldn't have known what to tell you about them. And so the time was ripe. I was going to pull the Hong Kong and Chinese style apart, strand by strand, so that I could better understand it, and then break it.